Thank you for joining us, everyone. Welcome to Coffee and a Mic. Today we're joined by Maricopa County Supervisor Jack Sellers. Jack, thanks for being here. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So tell us a little bit about what's happening at the county. What's top of mind over there?
Well, of course, mainly what you're going to hear from me is what my priorities at the county are. And, and Queen Creek, I think, is a great example of what's going on in Maricopa County with the phenomenal growth that you're experiencing here. It's really exciting and it's being well done. I know that growth can be frustrating because of the construction with the road blockages and things like that, but truly exciting, and I think you have some great municipal leadership here. But the thing that I worry about with the growth we're experiencing, and everyone knows that we have right now more than $60 billion in economic expansion happening in Maricopa County. And right now, we don't have a infrastructure plan, a critical infrastructure plan to address that growth. And I'm hearing from Intel and from TSMC and others that they're very concerned about whether or not we really are going to step up to keep up with what they're doing. And it's a matter of suppliers being able to bring materials to their sites and them being able to ship finished product, as well as having employees get back and forth to work. The other thing that this does, that's just kind of a sidelight to this, but a really important one. And by the way, I'll back up just a little bit. Critical infrastructure is more than roads. It's roads, it's transit, it's broadband, and it's water. And so, I feel like my job when we talk about critical infrastructure is to try to address all those areas. But a byproduct of this is people like Intel and TSMC, as they get going, pay a lot of money to their employees. Intel has 11 or 12,000 employees in the East Valley, and their average salary is over $100,000. And that's wonderful for what it does for our local merchants and people like that, but it creates a real problem for us in having housing that's affordable for school teachers, firefighters, and people like that. And, it's so interesting to me. I attended by Zoom a meeting with the National Association of Counties, and we were talking about the CHIPS Act and who's benefiting from that. And of course, one of the counties that's benefiting greatly from that is in Ohio, because they're getting $20 billion expansion from Intel there. And they've talked to me a lot about what kind of impact does it have on your area and things like that. But the fascinating thing to me was that even in Ohio, the things they're dealing with are not that dissimilar from what we're dealing with here. They obviously do not have a water issue, so that isn't one of the big things that they're addressing. But more than one person said, everybody around where we're going to be doing all this expansion says that, yes, we need workforce housing, just not by us. And, I experience that over and over again here. And I think part of the problem with that is people don't understand what workforce housing is. They visualize what we used to know as low-income housing, and that could drag a neighborhood down. It could cause, increased crime and those kind of things. That's not what we're talking about. To be able to qualify to get into the typical affordable housing thing now, you have to make like $50,000 or $60,000 a year for a family. And we have graduate engineers that are telling me they can't afford to live in this area because we do not have housing that they can afford when they come right out of college. Anyway.
So that's an interesting point. We can tackle that one first. Senate Bill 1117 does away with local zoning. So the idea being that local zoning takes too long to get a project going. They should be able to build multifamily, 4,000 square foot lots, do away with setbacks, pretty much build whatever you want if it's zoned for residential or commercial. So is that really a solution to affordable housing?
Absolutely not. And one of the things one of my biggest issues with government is that government needs to be as local as possible, because your municipal leaders and your county leaders are the people who actually come out and talk to you. By the time you get to the state level, the number of people that they're representing becomes such a small group, and if all the information they're getting is by going to LD meetings, then they don't know what people really care about. And the municipal leaders do, because they're hearing from you all the time. County leaders, we listen, and we're trying to represent you as well, and I think we do in fact, if you look at polling, you'll see that people have more respect for people more at the local level than they do at the state level, and certainly at the federal level. So, that isn't a solution. I think the solution maybe is as much education as is anything else. I've been dealing at the county with a county island in Chandler right now, and my frustration with that is that the anti-group got so vocal and so worked up that they created a very negative atmosphere for the whole workforce housing issue. So rather than just saying, perhaps this wasn't the right spot, but let's work together to find a place where it does work. I mean, they have people so worked up, they're saying, why should we have it in Chandler? We've worked hard to buy these very nice houses in Chandler. Why do we want affordable housing here? From my perspective, that's not a large percentage of the people, but they're nevertheless the most vocal people, and so we are not doing a good enough job in getting out in front of these issues and communicating better about them.
I think locally, you talked about that a little bit. In Queen Creek, it's about being strategic on where multifamily or townhouse type of projects go. Perhaps people will react better if they know that there's a set plan, which unfortunately Senate Bill 1117 would do away with. It would be the Wild West, put it wherever you feel like.
Yeah, and there are too many of those kind of things going on right now at the state level that would strip counties and municipalities of their ability to govern themselves.
Yeah, I think another interesting one that you touched on a little bit was water. And so we have the issue going now between the community Rio Verde up by North Scottsdale and the municipality of Scottsdale over the water and the access to the standing pipe. And so Rio Verde was allowed to be built because they were subdividing smaller lots, and then you didn't have to have the assured water supply.
Yeah, what we affectionately call wildcat developments.
Right, and so built without any real infrastructure. And now there's a bill at the State House to require municipalities to service those types of areas.
I guess my bottom line, and again, I hate to see the state get involved because the unintended consequences become worse than the problem you're trying to solve in too many cases. But, if I was just going to be very practical, heartless Jack, I would say, why are you entitled to water? You knew you didn't have water there when you moved there. Why am I responsible for ensuring that you can have this? Fortunately, it's in Tom Galvin's district, so I'm not the one that really has to go out and meet with the people and talk about it. But nevertheless, Tom, and this is a problem that's gone on for a long, long time. It's not something that just happened in the last year or so, except that Scottsdale cutting off the ability for people to use the standpipe in Scottsdale was something that happened fairly recently. But Tom came in, and he's been there just a little over a year now, but he came in and he went to work immediately, and he knows water issues well. He's the right guy to be working on that problem. But he started looking at alternatives and talking to all the people in the entire district or in the entire Rio Verde area about what would solve the problem for everybody out there. And he talked to the Corporation Commission and others, And he finally came up with a solution that said EPCOR, which has solved a major problem out in this area, is willing to supply the water if they can use the Scottsdale standpipe until they can get a system in place, which would take a couple of years, at no cost to Scottsdale. And they would pay for anything that Scottsdale had to do because of that. And Scottsdale basically has said no. And so they presented a plan to the supervisors just in the last couple of weeks that basically was going to triple the cost of water to the people out there and limit the people who could get the water from them, and all kinds of complications. And so we said, this doesn't really solve the problem. We can't support this. And it also said they wanted Maricopa County to be the water company for that solution. And we don't know anything about running a water company. We've never done that. Scottsdale has a water company. EPCOR is a water company. Why can't they work out something that satisfies this problem? And there are independent people out there that some of them even own their own water trucks that get their water from other places, and they would be stopped from being able to do that based on the agreement that Scottsdale sent to us. So a number of problems with that, but the state does not have a viable solution either. Why would you go and require, in this case, Maricopa County to become a water company when we have no system in place to do that?
And a little bit concerning on our part of the world, because there's areas outside of Apache Junction that are in a somewhat similar situation. I think Rio Verde is pretty unique, but hauled water situations, and people could then be required to supply water way out.
In fact, I flash back to when I was at the General Motors Proving Ground 100 years ago. And one of our issues was, and we were talking to Maricopa County and Pinal County about this, because on the east side of our property there were wildcat developments going on, and then the people that would build there would come and complain about the proving ground making noise or dust or whatever. And they basically said, the way the laws are written right now, we don't have any control over this. If somebody has 10 acres and they want to divide it into 4 2.5 acre, it's still within the rules.
So probably first issue to address maybe zoning and wildcats.
Well, and that's really where I would go with this. If kind of like the workforce housing thing in Chandler, I said the simple solution to this is, instead of having the county be set us up to try to be the bad guy here, annex it and control it however you want to. Make it part of your plan. One of the things I emphasize with and we'll talk about this a little bit later, I think, because you're going to ask me about the bill that would divide the county into 4 counties. But one of the things I think is most critical for my job is not to step on the toes of the municipalities that are in my district. Queen Creek, Chandler, Tempe, Gilbert, they have good organizations, and I'm not going to tell them how to run their operation. And one of the things I fear with either dividing county into 4 or adding more county supervisors is, now you're going to have people who are going to have a smaller area with more authority, and they're going to come in and tell Gilbert and Queen Creek and others, okay, this is the way we want this done. And we don't need that. We need a county supervisor that just kind of, like we do now, that we just kind of bridge the gaps and stay in touch with our municipalities on trying to keep everybody on the same page for our region.
So the most part, businesses through the chambers argue for local control. The Senate bill, we should get to that now, is proposing that we divide Maricopa County into 4 sections. Some services would still be joint, but essentially 4 separate governments. The idea being then that there would be more local control because the service area will be smaller. I think it's often said that if Maricopa County were a state, it would be like 44th in geographic size, and it's bigger than I don't even know how many states population-wise. But so we're talking a big county, but nowhere near as big as LA County, for example,
Yeah.
or some on the East Coast. But and so how would that really work? So 4 sets of supervisors.
Well, other than the fact that you would be making a fourfold increase in government, which is amusing to me because the people that are proposing this are people that theoretically represent the smallest government possible. But I always come back to Maricopa County is the fastest growing county in the United States for a reason, because we're very well run, we're very efficient. And why would you want to tinker with that? Why would you want to have now 4 county assessors that could create all kinds of problems for this compact area, and having people that have different assessed values depending on which county you're now in? 4 different treasurers, four different sheriff's departments. It just goes on and on. To me, it makes no sense. If we were really very poorly run, then I could see why somebody would come in and say, hey, let's fix this. But I've talked directly to the state senators and others that are proposing this, and I said, what problem are you trying to fix? And they said, well, we just want to improve government. I said, I do too. What problem are you trying to fix? And, I've not heard a good answer for that. The good answer for that probably is that they don't like the fact that we stood firm on some things that they were upset about. But from my perspective, everything we've done since I've been a county supervisor, we've always done what we had to do to stay completely within the law. When we had a pandemic and voting going on in an election, it created some issues for us. And how are you going to do this? And every time we had to make any kind of a change, we would go to everybody that was involved in it, the Secretary of State, the governor, the Senate President, the Speaker of the House, and everybody would buy into what we were proposing before we do anything. One of the big things that we did to deal with that was make virtually every vote location a vote center, so that you now didn't have to go to a precinct to vote. And I know there are people that argue that that's a good idea, but if we'd started out with vote centers instead of precincts for voting, nobody would have liked precinct voting. Because with vote centers, if you work 20 miles or 30 miles from home, you can now vote close to where you work, instead of having to spend an hour or 2 to get back to your locality to vote. And I think probably most of us, I know me, have experienced back in the olden days, I would go to vote in my precinct and find out that my precinct wasn't there anymore. And then have to go find out, the way the recorder and our elections group has set things up now, even when we had issues in this last election, you were able to find another vote center within 5 minutes of where you were. So you didn't have to stand in line any place if you're just willing to make that kind of an adjustment. So I think that we've made some drastic improvements. I really do think that you can always continue to improve, but most of the people that are writing the laws that want to change things are going to make it more difficult. I get very concerned about people who really don't understand how the system works writing laws to tell us how to do it. And part of that frustration for me came from the fact that when we had issues come up about the 2020 election and we toured legislators through our vote center tabulation center to see how things were done and to be able to ask questions, to see how the signature verification process was done. Almost every one of those legislators that actually toured that facility lost in their next election because the election denier people came out in force and said, you know, if you bought into what Maricopa County's doing, then you're a problem. You know, one of the people that got defeated was, in my judgment, one of the better legislators we've had, Rusty Bowers. You know, just I could name off a lot of them, but.
Right. I think there's a dozen bills related to elections that I had at last count. So it's going to be interesting.
And you look at now what the information's come out about what the AG was doing, what Fox News was doing, and I don't know what it takes for people to understand that what we did, you know, there are going to be hiccups in anything that's as complicated as doing elections. But Maricopa County won awards for our 2020 election. And, you know, when after we finished the 2022 election, my admin here said, so do you feel better now that the election's over? I said, are you talking about 2020 or 2022?
Yeah,
because 2020 has not gone away yet.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I don't think it's going to for quite some time. With I just saw the latest from Ms. Lake, but we'll get back to the election issues in just a minute. But the second half of your opening comment, one part being about the growth and transportation. So you've been a part of the transportation planning process for quite a while. I'm not sure anybody knows it better than you, but we have had a half-cent sales tax now for
40 years.
40 years, since the 80s, and it's what was used to build the freeway system. So those that arrived in the 70s and early 80s will remember there was only a piece of 17, 10, and that was about it. Everything else was surface streets here in Maricopa County. We use that money, we've built the roadways. It's expiring again, it expires every 20 years, sunsets. And now it's time to renew it. In fact, we're within a couple of years. And the planning process for those big projects are 5-year cycles, so we're already inside of one of those 5-year cycles, and it doesn't seem like we're going to get a bill. So we have to have a bill that'll allow Maricopa County voters to even vote on the tax itself.
Well, I'll start with that. One of my main frustrations, and one of the things that sometime before I die I want to fix, is the fact that Maricopa County represents over 60% of the population in Arizona, and we're the only county in the state that has to get the state's approval to refer something to our voters. You know, Prop 400 isn't something that we're saying, state legislator, approve this tax extension. We're saying, give us the right to refer this to our voters. We're not approving anything, the voters have to approve it. So that's a major frustration for me. The other thing, you know, that just lots and lots of issues, and I'll back up just a little bit based on, you know, you saying that I've been involved in this for a while. I served 6 years on the State Transportation Board. I currently chair the Maricopa County Association of Governments Transportation Policy Committee. And when I took over that seat, I said, you know, I'm not sure how I always managed to find the hot seat because, you know, the governor had just vetoed the Prop 400 extension that, by the way, had 38 legislators approve. And so there, you know, it was inexcusable that it was vetoed. It amazed me. I thought that Several of us had talked to the governor and thought that he was on board. But we had some people that are still fighting us on this that probably caused the veto. But anyway, one of the issues that we have spent a lot of time trying to explain to the people at the state government is, they're saying we still have 2 years before this Prop 400 expires, so there's no rush. It's already cost us somewhere around $200 million to not have this in place yet, because state law requires you to have identified funds before you can have anything in the plan. And so if you're going to acquire right-of-way for like State Route 30 in Phoenix or anything, you have to have identified funding in the plan. Well, the plan extends out for 20 years. And so if you don't have identified funding, even if the project is out 10 or 15 years from now, but you want to identify a right-of-way and start acquiring that right-of-way now so people don't end up building in your right-of-way, it becomes an issue. And so even for the expansion that TSMC is doing out on the northwest side now, they basically are saying what you have in the remaining part of Prop 400 does not address the fact that we're now investing $40 billion at this site. And I'm telling them one way or another we're going to get this done. And they said, well, if it isn't done in a timely manner, then we're going to have to slow our expansion, because we really cannot afford to have that kind of money invested in a plant that we can't support. But anyway, the other issues with this is that I've served on the Maricopa Association of Governments board for a lot of years, because I served there while I was in Chandler City Council, also while I was on the State Transportation Board, and now as a county supervisor. But another frustration with this is that MAG spent 2 years putting a plan together that got the approval of every single mayor and every Indian community in Maricopa County. And now we have legislators that are saying, well, we don't like this, we're going to have to tweak it. If we have to go back to the mayor of Phoenix or to the mayor of Goodyear or to the mayor of Mesa with a plan that has the guidelines that they're suggesting, it's not going to pass. It won't go anywhere. I've now been talking to some people privately about what do we have to do to put together a referendum to circumvent this. Just go to the voters with a referendum. And people are telling me, 500,000 signatures probably. So it's a big deal. But if that's what we have to do, that's what we have to do. My argument when I've talked to David Carroll and David Farnsworth and anybody else that will listen to me is we really cannot afford even to wait for 2024 to have this on a ballot. We need to have it this year. And that's what I'm trying to accomplish. One of the bills suggested that we needed to have only 5% for transit. And the argument that came out of the Free Enterprise Club was that the buses only have 5% occupancy, so that's all you need.
That's going to be a big talking point. So talking about the transit piece, the plan that comes out of the county governments, the Maricopa Association of Governments, involves bus routes, light rail, money to expand some of those routes, maintain them, as well as building lane miles and maintaining lane miles. If I understand correctly, the biggest talking points are that nobody rides the light rail, nobody rides the buses, and communities like Queen Creek receive no benefit from those services. We don't have those out here. So we have that issue, as well as we should just be concentrating on building roadways. That's all that we need.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that you all use the Santan Freeway. And my question would be, how many lane miles will it take to not have that congested? I don't think you can get there with the expansion we have going on, not just here, but in Pinal County. You simply cannot build enough miles. So you need to have a viable transit system, but you need to have a viable transit system for more reasons than one. Maricopa County is a non-attainment area environmentally. And basically, Intel and TSMC both had to get credits to be able to get a permit to build what they're doing. And we pretty much use that up.
We're talking about air quality.
Air quality. And, there are people that argue, well, if the bus isn't taking enough vehicles off the road, or they're not, whatever, that it's not going to have that much impact. I said it's a negotiating point. If you go to the federal environmental agency and say, we need to have these kind of adjustments because of various things, the amount of background that we get from other areas like LA here makes it almost impossible for us to meet the requirements as we move into different levels of non-attainment.
Their smog blows over and mixes with our smog.
But if we're even going to be able to negotiate, we have to be able to demonstrate that we're doing everything we can at our end to be able to address this problem. And, converting vehicles to electric and having transit. And, when people argue with me about light rail, my argument for that is I only want light rail where the municipality is willing to put up with the inconvenience of the construction and the additional cost. Prop 400 really doesn't spend a lot of money on transit. Well, really nothing on light rail, other than capital. And you need to have that to attract the federal dollars. But, if you go to Tempe right now and look at that modern streetcar, that thing is heavily used. And I fully understand why John Giles would like to see that extended out to the ballpark in Mesa, because they have some serious traffic problems there, particularly during spring training, and they'd like to see those areas developed into bigger entertainment areas than just for spring training. But why don't we, I hear the arguments that are being made about whether or not this would benefit Queen Creek. Well, let the voters tell them whether or not they approve of this, not the few people that are sitting at the table at the state level that are telling us what the plan needs to look like.
I think that's probably the biggest point, is all we're asking for is the ability to vote on a plan so we can get our 5-year cycles going again with ADOT and start building things.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, I think we're almost out of time. And at this point, we would take a few questions from the audience.
Well, I have a question. I moved to the United States in '95, so I frequently fly back to Europe just as recently as last year. Why do you think it's such a big push against the public transit? Because it's massively used And as a matter of fact, if I lie, I won't lie a whole lot because I can't remember exactly. But let's say annual ticket for using public transit in Vienna is maybe no more than $500, comparing to cost of owning a vehicle and everything that comes with that. It's not a brainer. So what's your explanation for a major push against it?
You know, I think that we have grown up in this area being very spread out. And so people really got very determined that nobody was ever going to take their vehicle away from them, that, you know, they needed to be able to drive anywhere they wanted to go. But, you know, I've been to Europe a couple of times, and I look at areas there that could not survive without mass transit. But all you have to do is go to DC here and think about what would they do there if they did not have mass transit. It kind of becomes the chicken and egg thing on, you know, people complain about, well, I can't take mass transit because, you know, if I miss my bus, I have to wait 30 minutes for another one. You have to have the system in place that people can depend on. And if you go to a bus stop and you've missed your bus, you can just wait because there's going to be another one in 10 minutes. You know, that's a whole different thing than the way we're structured today because we're just so piecemeal. And just getting things established, you know, takes a lot. When PayPal opened up in Chandler, they came to me and said, what do we have to do to get a bus stop in front of our facility? Because our people don't want to drive. They want to be able to ride a bus to work. But right now they have to walk a half a mile if they take a bus. And I was on the Chandler City Council at the time, and I worked for a year to try to make that happen and couldn't make it happen because there were not funds available to do that. You know, and the argument was, well, the bus that's out there now doesn't have that good a ridership. Well, if you moved it a half a mile further north, maybe you would have enough ridership.
So I think one of the things that we talk about is if that we had a mature system, or as we build this and head towards a mature system over the next couple of decades, then we would have that kind of ridership.
Yeah, and I think it's going to get easier as we get further and further into autonomous vehicles. Because as autonomous vehicles become better and more widely used, now you don't need fixed rails to have a train. You know, you could have passenger vans that would have all kinds of flexibility so that they would run in a fixed area, maybe with a dedicated lane, but without fixed rails, but be able to turn off of that to go the last half mile, if that's what this van with, you know, 10 or 15 people in it was scheduled to do. I see with what's happening with technology today, it's an exciting time. And I just hope that we have the wherewithal to encourage it. And in some areas, I feel pretty good about that. In other areas, I'm frustrated.
Thank you.
Very good. Well, Supervisor Sellers, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, as always, talking to you.
My pleasure.
And
I love this community. You know, I think that we have still have some serious infrastructure problems out here that I hope we can address, but we need to get an extension of Prop 400.
wonderful. Thank you, everybody.